Nintendo is arguably the most influential game company in the world. So much of what's come out of Nintendo has paved the way for the industry that we know today. Whether it be the impact Breath of the Wild has had on newer games, the influence of the Super Nintendo controller, they're responsible for way more than you know. Today I'm going to take you down a brief history of Nintendo, showing you the risks that they took to get to where they are today, how they almost lost it all, and how they emerged victorious in the end. My name is James or Flaffy, and this is Nintendo. Rise, fall, and rise again. Nintendo was founded on September 23rd, 1889 by Fusajiro Yamauchi under the name Nintendo Koppai. It started as a playing card company specializing in Hanafuda, which is a style of Japanese playing card that literally translates to flower playing cards. The business stuck to its roots for nearly 80 years, with ownership passed down throughout the Yamauchi family. It was renamed Yamauchi Nintendo & Co. in 1933 and later renamed Nintendo Karuta or Nintendo Cards in 1950 by its third president, Hiroshi Yamauchi, the great-grandson of the original founder. Hiroshi Yamauchi's presidency was essential for the growth of the company, as he took far more risks and leaps into other endeavors than his predecessors. In 1958, he made a deal with Disney to allow their characters on Nintendo playing cards. You see, the Japanese heavily associated playing cards with gambling, which is both illegal and heavily frowned upon in the country. In fact, Hanafuda itself was created as a sneaky way to get around the foreign playing card ban and, well, gamble. This move to include Disney characters to make the products more approachable by the public was a genius move, because nothing says this isn't gambling like Mickey Mouse. For additional profit alongside the Disney-themed playing cards, Nintendo also released books describing the many different games that you can play with a deck of playing cards. The success of this move allowed Yamauchi to take the company public in 1962, where he then shortened the name to Nintendo the following year. From there, they tried many different endeavors, all of which failed miserably, including, but not limited to, instant rice, a taxi service, and a vacuum cleaner. It is also alleged that they had at one point owned a love hotel, which is like a normal hotel, specifically for adult things, but this rumor is largely based on an unverified claim from the book Game Over by David Sheff. And if it is real, then I want to go. The 1964 Japan Olympics would bring forth a very scary point in Nintendo's history, as after the economic boom that followed the event, the playing card market would become overly saturated. Nobody needed playing cards anymore, and as a result, their stock price fell dramatically, from the equivalent of $2.50 down to just 17 cents at the time. The company was nearly bankrupt, but soon found a shimmer of hope in a maintenance engineer of all people named Gunpei Yokoi. During a visit to the Hanafuda factories in 1966, Yamauchi noticed a strange extendable claw, which Yokoi had made for fun. Realizing the genius of this idea, Yamauchi ordered Yokoi to turn this into a real product for Christmas, leading to the creation of the Ultra Hand. You've probably seen one of these things before, so as you can imagine, it was a huge success. Yokoi was taken off maintenance and placed on product development, which would prove to be one of the best choices the company has ever made. Throughout the late 60s and early 70s, Nintendo shifted its focus from playing cards to toys, releasing things like puzzles, a soft baseball machine called the Ultra Machine or the Slugger Mate outside of Japan, and the Love Tester, which pairs great with those hotels that I mentioned earlier. They also created one of the first programmable drum machines, the Elakanga, but most impressively, in 1970, they created the Nintendo Beam Gun. This was the first commercially available light gun, which was later licensed to the first commercially available video game console, the Magnavox Odyssey, in 1972. So yes, Nintendo's first leap into video games wasn't actually their own doing. It was the result of a toy that they made. They took this product a little further with the Laser Clay Shooting System, one of many light gun-based arcade-style games that Nintendo would develop during this time. And if this light gun thing doesn't sound familiar to you yet, it eventually turned into this. A few years later, in 1977, Nintendo partnered with Mitsubishi, of all companies, to create their first video game consoles, the Color TV Game 6 and the Color TV Game 15. which are great names, I know. And while they found a lot of success with these new business adventures, nothing would create as big of a boom for the company as a 27-year-old game designer named Shigeru Miyamoto. In 1979, Miyamoto was tasked with art design on an arcade game called Sheriff, where you play as a county sheriff defending a town against bandits to rescue a damsel in distress. I know it sounds really simple now, but for its time, this was basically Red Dead Redemption.
I'm your old friend Amnesia.
The game was a success for Nintendo, and so they asked Miyamoto to begin work on another game, this time under Yokoi's supervision. Sticking with the idea of rescuing a damsel in distress eventually led Miyamoto to create a little game called Donkey Kong. I don't need to tell you how successful Donkey Kong was, but something very interesting is that Universal Studios did attempt to sue Nintendo for copyright infringement over their character King Kong, and ultimately lost that lawsuit as they had claimed that King Kong was public domain in a previous lawsuit. As a thank you for winning them the lawsuit, Nintendo gifted their lawyer a $30,000 boat called the Donkey Kong, as well as worldwide rights to use the name Donkey Kong for sailboats. That lawyer's name was John Kirby, and although it's never been explicitly stated anywhere, it is widely believed that our pink friend is named after him as well. By the way, during the time that all of this was happening, Yokoi developed the Game & Watch, which became the first majorly successful handheld gaming device. From here, everything skyrocketed, but before we touch on the huge, notable accomplishments of Nintendo during this time, I wanted to talk about something that videos and articles that are similar to this often gloss over, and that is the Donkey Kong Game & Watch from 1982. You may notice that this picture has a line going down the middle of it, and that is because the Donkey Kong Game & Watch had two screens. It is not only the direct inspiration for the Nintendo DS and the Game Boy Advance SP, but is also the first appearance of the modern D-pad. It's crazy, I know, but what's even crazier is that Nintendo was about to make another one of their most influential moves the following year. In 1983, Nintendo released the world's first successful cartridge-based video game console, the Family Computer, otherwise known as the Famicom. Fun fact, we were actually supposed to get this console in the United States, but never did because Atari backed out of their distribution deal with Nintendo last minute, which eventually led Nintendo to redesign, rename, and sell the console themselves as the Nintendo Entertainment System in 1985. Understandably, they wanted some new games for this launch, so they called upon Shigeru Miyamoto, who had just finished directing Excite Bike and Duck Hunt, among some other projects. He then directed, designed, and produced Super Mario Bros. And The Legend of Zelda just a few months later. You know, just like casually making two of the most important games of all time faster than I can, do almost anything. Following that, Yokoi helped to produce several other games, with Kid Icarus and Metroid being the most notable. You could spend hours talking about the influence that the few games that I've mentioned have had on the gaming industry, but the most basic and important ones are Super Mario Bros. Paved the way for the platformer genre, The Legend of Zelda defined and popularized open-world non-linear gameplay, and Metroid gave us one of the first badass female protagonists and also created its own genre. Just a few years later, in 1989, our GOAT, Yokoi, created the Game Boy, further revolutionizing handheld gaming. As you already know, the Game Boy was crazy successful, but it would take only one more year for Nintendo to have its next huge impact on the gaming industry with the Super Nintendo Entertainment System. Can we just take a moment to acknowledge all of this? Because genuinely, the amount of impact that they've had in just one decade is crazy. That's about how long it takes them to make one Mario Kart game now. Anyways, the Super Nintendo had a huge impact on modern gaming, not just because of the console itself, but the controller. What you're looking at here is the first use of shoulder buttons, a layout of face buttons that I'm sure you're familiar with, and the first use of this general shape. That last one might sound stupid, but give me like 1 second. Others might think the PlayStation DualShock has had more of an influence on modern gaming controllers, and they're probably right, but check this out. If you grab almost any newer controller, you'll likely find this general shape somewhere within the controller. And while you could credit this layout to the Famicom or the NES controllers, I think that this design is slightly more in line with what we see today. Hardware aside, there's a lot of super influential SNES games. You have the first Mario Kart, Chrono Trigger, Super Mario World, and A Link to the Past, just to name a few. But of all the SNES games, the one that I want to highlight is an often underappreciated title called Harvest Moon. Many people didn't like this game on release, as it was so vastly different from everything that was available at the time, but it's largely credited for helping to define the cozy game genre, and is a direct inspiration for Stardew Valley. If you've ever played that, Animal Crossing, or anything similar, you have Harvest Moon to thank. In the same fateful year of Harvest Moon's release in Japan, Nintendo would give us Pokemon Red and Green, the N64, and oh my god, what is that? No, get it away! Get it away! If Super Mario Bros. On the NES is responsible for defining the platformer genre and paving the way for what was to come after it, then Super Mario 64 is responsible for elevating that concept into the world of 3D. It's widely regarded to be one of the best 3D platformers of all time, with many people claiming that even to this day, it is the best overall experience of any Mario game. I'm sorry for doing this, and you might be tired of hearing it, but Ocarina of Time is undeniably one of the most influential games of all time. But amongst all of this greatness, there is something lurking in the dark. A piece of Nintendo's history that I glossed over: the Virtual Boy. That feels like the only way that you can say it. The Virtual Boy was Nintendo's first attempt at 3D gaming, like VR kind of 3D gaming, in 1995. It may come as a shock to hear, but objectively, this device was well ahead of its time, and that's part of the reason why it failed. The technology that we had just wasn't there at the time. Using the Virtual Boy led to headaches, eye strain, and nausea. Since entering the video game industry, it remains Nintendo's biggest failure, being the only standalone console of theirs to sell under 1 million units. And while the Nintendo 64 did sell well for its time and housed some of the most important games ever made, it was still dwarfed by the PlayStation. Nintendo needed a new console to put them back on top. They tried tirelessly, rushed several projects to get ahead of the competition, and released the Nintendo GameCube. The GameCube is a great console. Some of my favorite games of all time were released on this device, and the controller itself remains one of my favorites. But when you're going up against the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox, you are fighting one of the hardest fights that a console has ever had to fight. Nintendo lost, very publicly. The GameCube was a commercial failure. It wasn't anywhere close to the Virtual Boy, but it still didn't do well, especially compared to its competition. The only thing keeping Nintendo afloat was the Game Boy Color in 1998 and the Game Boy Advance in 2001, with the Advance alone outselling the Nintendo 64, the GameCube, and the Virtual Boy combined. Nintendo was lost, and if they wanted to escape the pits of failure, they would need to change something. In May of 2002, Hiroshi Yamauchi stepped down as the president of Nintendo, passing leadership down and out of the family for the first time to a man who's silently been here since the Nintendo Entertainment System, working alongside them at HAL Laboratories. That man's name is Satoru Iwata. Iwata is responsible for returning Nintendo to their roots of taking leaps where others may be too afraid to. The quote from this video's intro serves as the perfect example of that. At Nintendo, we don't run from risk, we run to it. And run to it they did. Just 2 years later, in 2004, they returned to that Donkey Kong Game & Watch for inspiration and released the Nintendo DS. Iconic, beautiful. This is the DS Lite, which is arguably one of the best gaming consoles of all time. And just when you think Nintendo is back on top, just 2 years later, they do it again. They released the Nintendo Wii in 2006, a whole year after the Xbox 360, and just a few days after the PlayStation 3, but despite showing up late to the race this time, they won. These two consoles, within the span of 2 years, redefined both handheld and home console gaming. They were back on top of the world, releasing some of the best games ever made, making some of the most important leaps in gaming influence we've seen once again. But as time passed, things began to get a little shaky. The Nintendo 3DS launched in 2011, and while it ended up being successful in the long run, the initial price of the console scared too many consumers away. After only half a year on the market, Nintendo had to cut the price by $80 just for people to start justifying the purchase. Like I said, in the long run it worked out, but in the moment things were not looking good, and as I've shown throughout this video, failure for Nintendo tends to come in pairs. The Wii U. A lot of people may not realize how much of a failure the Wii U really was, so let's put it into perspective this way. The GameCube sold a little under 22 million units from 2001 to 2007 and was viewed as a commercial failure. The Wii U sold 13.5 million units from 2012 to 2017. It was a disaster. Just when things seemed like they couldn't get any worse, nearly 3 years after the launch of the Wii U, Satoru Iwata fell ill and tragically died of cancer at the age of 55. At the time, it felt like Nintendo was done for. They had lost the very man who sought to bring the company back to what it was, a company that wasn't afraid of taking risks, and a company that, above all else, put gamers first. Although the Wii U was a failure, it served as a stepping stone towards something greater. Iwata was succeeded by the former president of Nintendo of America, Tatsumi Kimishima. From there, it would take only 2 years for Nintendo to have their biggest success to date. The Nintendo Switch is currently on track to be the best-selling game console of all time, being only 5 million units under the PS2 in total sales at the time of writing this video. Perfecting the concept for the Wii U and making this move to combine both their handheld and home console expertise was such a genius decision, and it's exactly the type of move that we've come to know and love Nintendo for, only this time, it worked out, like better than they could have ever asked. While the Switch's library might not be the most impressive over all their consoles, Breath of the Wild alone has inspired hundreds of games and game developers over the last 9 years, and the Switch 2, it was just the most successful console launch of all time. That's insane. Sure, over the past few years, Nintendo has made a lot of mistakes, but it is through those mistakes that they have built the very foundation on which modern gaming stands. Is their business model perfect now? No. I wish that they would put their games on sale. I wish that they were less protective with their IP and actually let esports events that are funded, produced, and run by their community have more freedom. But at the end of the day, they are still Nintendo, and we love them. Above all, video games are meant to be just one thing: fun. Fun for everyone. Thanks for watching. Subscribe and leave a like if you enjoyed the video as much as I enjoyed making it. It really does help out a ton. And if you want to take it a step further, share this with somebody who you think will also enjoy the video, and comment your favorite Nintendo game. I love learning new things, so I genuinely did enjoy working on this video so much, but not as much as I enjoyed making our Wii Fit video. This video is so silly goofy, it's very funny, I could not recommend it more. And if you'd rather watch something that is long form and informative like this video, you can go ahead and check out our video on Ocarina of Time. My name is James Orflaffy. It's been a while since I've said this, but as always, have a fantastic rest of your day.